A relatively popular theory in our day is that Babylon in the 17th and 18th chapters of Revelation is a reference to the historical city of Babylon that in the last days will be resurrected, glorified, and become the most powerful city on the planet. Is there any meat on the bones of this theory? What does the Bible and history say about this subject? Stay tuned for a reasoned response to this subject. Hi there, I'm Lee Brainerd. Welcome to Soothkeep and another edition of Prophecy in the Crucible. My mission is truth. Truth at any cost. Truth above every other consideration. Now, the truth that we're trying to lay hold of today concerns the theory that prophetic Babylon in the last days will be the literal historical city of Babylon, restored to its glory, to go beyond its glory, to be the most powerful city in the world, the capital of the Antichrist government. Now, there's two key components to this theory. The first component is the prophecy in Jeremiah's chapters 50 and 51, where we read that Babylon will be destroyed and never rebuilt again. The second part is the claim that Babylon was not historically destroyed and that it has been continually inhabited since the time of Jeremiah. Now, the testimony in Jeremiah is pretty straightforward and it can't be denied. Babylon is going to be desolate, according to chapter 50, verse 3. Its foundation walls and its foundations are going to be fallen and its walls are going to be thrown down, according to chapter 50, verse 15. There will be no farm work within its vicinity again in chapter 50, verse 16. And there will be no inhabitants, chapter 50, verse 3, and chapter 50, verse 40. This means that the answer to this question is going to hang entirely, not on the interpretation of Scripture so much, but on the historical evidence for the fate of Babylon. If Babylon was never truly destroyed and has been continually existent, then the claim of its future glorification and devastation could be true. However, if Babylon was destroyed and did cease to be a living community, then the claim of future glorification and destruction is overthrown. Because remember, according to the prophecy, Babylon is going to become desolate and never be rebuilt. So if her desolation is historical fact, she's not going to be rebuilt in the future. But if her desolation is not historical fact, and she's been a continuing community, then she could be rebuilt in the last days and destroyed. So let's take up the question according to history. Was Babylon destroyed and desolated in history? Well, after Alexander's death in 323 BC, and he passed away in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, the empire became divided. And we're talking, of course, of the Greek Empire. And after decades of war and turmoil, the city and the surrounding region slowly emptied and decayed. According to a tablet that was discovered in the excavation work in the area, in 275 BC, the inhabitants of Babylon were transported to Seleucia, and Babylon decreased into insignificance. By the time we come to the rise of the Parthian Empire in 141 BC, the city of Babylon was deserted and forgotten. Now, in that time, the Parthians did conquer the entire region of Babylon, Babylonia. But they employed the city of Seleucia as the regional seat, and that's where they minted their coinage. Somewhere between 10 BC and AD 20, Strabo wrote in his geography about Babylon, the city is a great desert. Now, Cassius Dio also wrote about Trajan's visit in AD 115. And he wrote, he, that is Trajan, had gone there both because of its fame and because of Alexander, to whose spirit he offered sacrifice in the room where he died. However, it also tells us he saw nothing but mounds and stones and ruins to justify this. In the 4th century AD, Macarius, in his Apocryticus, wrote, or look on Babylon, the capital of Assyria, once so fair and of such enormous proportions, then desolated by the Persians, and now not preserving a trace of its former greatness. According to various Islamic historical records, at the time of the Islamic conquest or Muslim conquest around AD 650, AD 650, the city was buried beneath the sands. This is an important point to remember, because we're already here, have over 800 years of desolation and non-existence. Now, Babylon, according to ancient records, did have a Christian bishop up until the time of the Islamic or Muslim conquest, which was in the mid-6th century. But this, when you look at all the evidence on the subject, it was with an associated village in the area. It was not Babylon itself. In the 10th century, Ibn Hakal, and in the 13th century, Al-Qazwini, both described Babylon as having only a small village of people in the vicinity. Other than that, it was a desolate region. Now, one thing that has been pointed out is that Parthian and Arabic coins have been found within the walls of Babylon. And people will point to this and say that it proves that there was continual inhabitancy in the area. Well, no, it doesn't prove that there was continual inhabitancy in the area. The presence of a handful of coins that have been discovered could just as readily be explained by traders and merchants passing through the region and setting up camps or markets within the walls as having a continual thriving community. Another thing that shows up in the Arabic records from the medieval times is that the ancient city of Babylon was essentially a brick quarry. From all that glorious structures that were there for many, many centuries, they were continually picked at in the medieval times, and people would come in and take wagon loads of bricks out, cart loads of bricks out, and take them to places as far flung as Baghdad and Basra to use those bricks. Now, what's also interesting is when we come up to the 17th and 18th centuries, we're talking here the 1600s and the 1700s, and then going on into the earlier 1800s, travelers could not find Babylon. It wasn't until early in the 1800s that the location of Babylon was actually discovered by an archaeologist who eventually did some exploratory digging in the area. Now, all these comments here, especially the ones from the recent centuries, put a lot of important context on the population that was associated with the area of Babylon during the archaeological excavations around 1900 to 1917, where there are claims that there was as many as 10,000 people living in the area. And people tend to lean on that claim and say, see, there's always been people living there. But that's not handling the data correctly. The original archaeologists that showed up at the site didn't find a thriving town within the walls of ancient Babylon or even within the immediate vicinity. It was a desolate area. Now, they found there was a few small villages nearby that were populated by wandering shepherds and other migrants. But there was no large towns, or there was no towns or large towns anywhere in the immediate vicinity. The large community that's referred to by some sprang up like a mining boom town when the workers moved to the area to capitalize on the good money they could make doing excavation work and other work for the archaeologists and the foreigners that were associated with the archaeology work. And then, of course, businessmen moved in to take advantage of the boom. So this was, the archaeology dig was like a boomtown situation, just like a mining boomtown. To this day, there are rebuilt structures within the old walls of Babylon that were rebuilt in the days of Saddam Hussein and his Babylon project. And there's been some restoration and some continuation of buildings since then. In fact, in 2019, the site was declared a World Heritage Site, but very few people outside of the Iraqis themselves actually go to visit the site. But to this day, there are no inhabited residences within the site, within the actual outer walls of ancient Babylon. That whole area is filled with basically wilderness and wild animals, similar to what the book of Jeremiah said it would be. So in conclusion, it is simply not true that Babylon never ceased to exist. It is simply not true that Babylon has continued to be an inhabited community from Jeremiah's day to the present day. Babylon was a ghost town from the rise of the Parthian Empire to the present time. There have been small villages in the area off and on from medieval times to the present day, but that doesn't constitute a continual existence within the walls of Babylon or even right in the immediate vicinity of Babylon. So how was this city destroyed? We don't have any exact details on how the city was actually destroyed. But we do read that Macarius, for instance, Macarius tells us, following the lead of ancient historians, that the city was desolated by the Persians. Now, a lot of people roll their eyes at this statement and similar statements because they say, no, that can't be the case, because we see in the Bible that when the Persians conquered Babylon, they didn't destroy the city, and Babylon continued all the way up to the days of Alexander the Great as a relatively great city, even though it was slowly losing its glory. But the fact is, I think the destruction of Babylon probably is referring more to policies that destroyed it than to a destruction in actual battle or in actual warfare. We do know that the city was still intact after the Persians and was intact all the way up until the time of Alexander the Great. So it was policies enacted in the time of the fractured Greek Empire, policies enacted in the time of the Parthian Empire that resulted in the destruction over time of the city of Babylon. The policies included the choice of Seleucia over Babylon. It included the transfer of the citizens of Babylon to Seleucia. And these things led to the downfall, decay, and destruction of Babylon. So citizen by citizen, brick by brick, and century upon century of the city facing the elements and facing scavengers, Babylon just decayed, fell apart, and became a wilderness and a desolation, and that's what it remains to today. What's interesting about this is I remember back in the days of Saddam Hussein, and he was making the efforts to make a glorious restored city in Babylon. And there was a flurry of books at the time claiming that this was going to be the restored glorious Babylon of the last days. The Antichrist was going to sit in it. And a lot of my friends were reading these books, and they were trying to convince me of the thing. And every time I just say, guys, I just don't see it. All I see is the historical evidence that Babylon ceased to exist. And I see evidence that the Babylon in the prophetic scriptures, the prophetic Babylon, is a mystery Babylon, not the literal historical Babylon. And I predicted that Saddam Hussein's project was going to just fall by the wayside. And here we are decades later, and any progress made is very slow. There's not a lot of support for the project, even though the World Heritage Organization has taken the project up. At any rate, it doesn't really matter whether we can point to a line or a paragraph in an ancient historian that tells us which army destroyed Babylon at which time. Because it doesn't matter if Babylon was destroyed by war or if it was just destroyed by the ravages of time and by policies of the fractured Greek Empire and the policies of the Parthian Empire. Neglect and policies and scavengers can destroy a city just as well as warfare can. So I am perfectly satisfied with the testimony from history that Babylon was essentially a ghost town from the rise of the Parthian Empire to the present day. And these 2,000 years of wasteland there in the Babylon, within the confines of the walls of Babylon, that satisfies me that Babylon was destroyed historically. Its destruction is a fact of history. So, because I'm satisfied with the physical evidence that you can see today and with the historical testimony evidence that goes all the way back to the time of the rise of the Parthian Empire, that it's been a desolation the whole time, with no permanent community there, no continuing community there. Because I believe that, I am not looking for literal Babylon to be rebuilt and then destroyed again. Very clear in Jeremiah, once it's destroyed, completely destroyed, it's not ever going to be rebuilt again. So I am perfectly content to look for a spiritual Babylon in the last days that will coexist with the city that is spiritually called Sodom in Egypt. Eyes wide open, brain engaged, heart on fire. We'll see you next time.